Welcome back. As Mark said, we are going to start Q&A. If you have any questions, please add them to the chat, but we'll start with some of the questions that we have. So this one is for all of the speakers. Fracking takes place in many shale plays. What differences might exist in health impacts? And how are study results translatable across shale plays?
Okay, that's a great question. Maybe I'll start and any of the other speakers could jump in. I think, yeah, there are a lot of heterogeneities in the way, the depths of the shale play, kind of, wet or dry, different industries, different processes. So on one hand, there are a fair amount of differences. On the other hand, we know that there are many things in common, like the petroleum products releasing volatile organic chemicals, or diesel operated equipment at the site releasing particulate matter and diesel exhaust, noise, light, kind of ecological disturbances. So some of these things are common across the sites. And I guess when I look at the body of research, I think there's a lot of consistency in the observed associations. Like, for example, there have been, I don't know, about 20 studies maybe looking at adverse birth outcomes, and that's we're seeing very similar relationships, whether it's California, Colorado, Texas, Pennsylvania. So, I think that while there may be some underlying differences, the trends are pointing in the same direction.
I just definitely want to underscore, like, the amount of consistency between the birth outcome studies in particular is it's remarkable. I mean, there are other very toxic environmental exposures where you don't consistently get nearly as identical of results, honestly. Yeah, there's some little differences in how people measure, say, like, their particular adverse birth outcome of interest, but this consistency between Texas, Pennsylvania, and California in particular is really lends credibility to that. There's consistent problems with living near oil and gas drilling.
Okay, here's one. Does the threat still exist about using fracking wastewater along roads?
Could you repeat that, Jess?
We're going to have a study tomorrow that talks about that. Just FYI.
What was the question again, Jesse?
Sorry, I have multiple screens.
Maybe I can jump in there. I think the question was about in some states it was permissible to apply brine to roads for dust suppression or de-icing. And I think actually I'm not sure if it was if unconventional oil and gas waste was allowable, if it was conventional. And policies differ, I know, between Pennsylvania and Ohio. But yeah, Nat Warner or his group will, I'm sure, be able to provide the latest information on that.
Yeah, I think Pennsylvania it's been outlawed now, but I don't know for sure.
Dr. Willis, this question is for you. Is any or all of this information in your studies being used during the growth and development stages of those born throughout the study?
So we can only look at in birth outcome studies, you only know where the mom reports living at delivery. So what address was put down on the birth certificate functionally, which means we really only know the answer to one specific point in time. About 30+% of moms move during pregnancy. So unfortunately, this is definitely a source of confounding in our data, but we can't necessarily do much with it right now. It's just unfortunately a limitation of the study design.
Dr. Talbot, this question is for you. How would oil and gas waste be tracked since it is not considered toxic legally? And are locations where such waste is accumulated going to be considered in the study?
Wow, maybe Nicole or Mary know more than I do. I do not know. I do not know. That's a very good question. I do not know. Nicole, do you have any idea?
Sorry, I was looking at the other question about spills.
Oh,
Um,
oil and gas that is, what'd you say, oil and
Oil and gas waste.
waste that is applied to like roads and stuff. How could we track that? Can we track that?
Yeah.
That's a great question.
Yeah, I can put in the chat one study I know of by Seth Shonkoff, who I think is also, he's definitely speaking, I don't know if it's today or tomorrow, about it. He's talking about a different topic at this conference, but has spoken about that at past meetings. I think, I guess just to amplify this question, the fate of the wastewater is a major issue that is hard to track. And the research, the research really focuses on the well pad and not the waste. And I know I did one study that looked at the waste being disproportionately disposed of in areas of lower income. So there's environmental justice issues. But yeah, I think the data are really difficult in terms of trying to track it and follow it. I'm also concerned about the radioactive waste, the solid waste from the drilling cuttings, and the fate of that as well. So I think these are important areas for future work.
Okay, Dr. Diesel, are there assessment tools that can be used at old sites? So for example, a site that used to be a flowback area to determine presence of pollutants at that site?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if the tools are like different or specific to, but I mean, you could certainly test soil, water, look at records, kind of all the same, the same approaches. Do certain chemistry and source apportionment techniques, which some of my geologist colleagues do. So I guess that's what I would have to say about that. Good question.
Dr. Willis, I have a question for you. It's 3 parts, but I can ask them one at a time and let you answer in between. Okay. Recognizing that association does not equate to causation, what do public health officials regard as a significant deviation in birth weight?
So one, I saw this question. This is a very well phrased question. I really appreciate it. As far as what is a significant deviation in birth weight for an individual baby, 10 grams, which is roughly what we find, it's very small, right? So it's not necessarily something that we know is going to have a long-term health outcome problem, that kind of thing. However, 10 grams at the population level is still quite a bit, right? You could be moving infants down into the low birth weight category, which has a lot of implications for chronic conditions later in life.
The second part, are the recorded birth weights within an acceptable range?
So the mean birth weight is pretty reasonable here. These are infants who made it to term. And so they are infants who are probably they've survived birth, they're doing pretty darn well. The key limitation with birth data, which I didn't quite get into because this is kind of a side project that I work on, is that birth data is inherently limited to live births, right? And so once you get to 37 weeks and before, you're missing where infants don't necessarily survive, you're missing pregnancies that result in a spontaneous abortion, you're missing couples who didn't get pregnant at all. So it's right, we're conditioning on live birth, which creates some difficulties for understanding, say, the full spectrum of reproductive health outcomes. However, even after conditioning on live birth, we still see that there's this small effect across this large population. Sorry, it's a little detailed. I could go on for too long on this topic.
And what factor does the educational background of birth mothers account for? Because noting that this information was acquired and therefore presumably plays some significance.
So a key thing you'll notice that we can't get at in birth records is we can't get at like household income. We can't articulate which of these moms is maybe in a low income household. So we have to use other surrogates to get at that. We know mothers of lower socioeconomic status are at higher risk of adverse birth outcomes. So we need to control for that in our study. Ideally, right, we'd have, say, household income or even insurance status, which we don't have in Texas for this time period. So the closest we could get to really here was maternal educational attainment.
Great, thank you so much. Oh, Dr. Talbot, with the childhood cancer studies, how were family genetics considered as a variable?
That's a very good question. I don't have the question right in front of me, but there are 8 or 10 genetic syndromes. Down syndrome is one of them, and there's 8 or 10 that have been linked, that that your baby's born, they're not thriving or whatever, and they do a genetic test. And some of these are actually done on all newborns, but generally there are 8 to 10 genetic syndromes that do in fact incur a certain amount of risk for cancer, as development ensues. So that we do have, but you're right. There's gene environment interaction. We know that. We know there's somatic and genetic mutations. We know there's things that happen, when you're exposed to something. There are things that happen to your mother that then creates the situation that is passed down to the child. So we know there've got to be some really significant genetic components to this. But we at this state, we don't have the tools. The technology isn't there yet. So in order to really do that type of testing, you'd almost have to do a genome-wide sequencing, of every childhood cancer case and controls, and try to see if there's some fingerprint, some smoking gun fingerprint that then links back to a certain exposure. And we're just not there yet. But I'm hoping in the future we do have that. But I just want to make a comment, if I could diverge a bit about what we talked about with grams of differences in birth weight that Mary was talking about. There's an early study, we're talking like 1972, by, I think the name was Thompson. I do have the paper, and I can send it to you, Mary, where they did it in Los Angeles, and they followed, they looked at smoke. This is like an early study. They looked at mothers who smoked, who were the same age, same race, obviously the same gender, but same social milieu, and they followed them. And there was a 33, when we know what smoking does, but they also took a group of women who were in air pollution. If you know about Los Angeles in the 70s and 80s, if you were jogging down Colorado Boulevard, suddenly you would get this burning sensation in your lungs. This happened to me, and you'd go, what the heck's happening to me? And you realized it was ozone. It was just the bad air pollution. Okay. So they actually found and I want to say, when I say 33, I think it was a 33-gram difference in people in air pollution areas compared to non-air pollution areas. So my point is 33 grams was considered pretty darn significant. So, and you were seeing 16, Mary, is that what you were saying?
The final results are about 7, but yeah, roughly between like 7 and 16 in our
16
models, after accounting for socioeconomic.
So I consider that, an important thing to note. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you. Another question for you, Dr. Willis. What about trying to find birth mothers that have moved to include in this study? Do you have any resources to put towards this kind of work?
So we include people who might have moved. We just literally don't know the answer to this. Like, we only have maternal address at delivery. There are some clever ways you can work with this. Like, there are some studies that Texas in particular has a really great childhood cancer registry, and you have address where they lived when they were diagnosed with childhood cancer. So you can start quantifying how many people moved in the state based on birth records, and then when they report later on, did they live at the same location? They've done a lot of studies like that, but like, it's not really getting at quite the question of what proportion of people in our study actually moved. It's just really trying to work around the fact that we only get one address at delivery, unfortunately.
Thank you. And one last question before we have to wrap up. Dr. Diesel, are there any studies I could refer to regarding the difference in results if testing for chemicals later on rather than immediately after a spill?
Yeah, so I actually put one reference in the chat regarding the spills. I think because we don't have immediate information publicly available on when and where spills occur, I'm not aware of anyone doing that type of work, but I did, the US Geological Survey has done some work on spills and impacts to streams and things like that. So I just put one paper out there that might at least partially address the question.